In this video we will talk about the Submariner, the 2020 release, the latest and greatest iteration of what is arguably the most iconic diver's watch in the known universe. While we are looking at the one with the blue bezel here, what we discussed in this video also applies to pretty much all the other Submariners with a date, including the standard steel sub with the black bezel. Now before we continue, all the essentials in the next 60 seconds. The 41mm Oyster case features a tried and tested Oyster architecture, a monoblock middle case, a screw-down case back and a triplock winding crown. The resulting watch is waterproof to 300 meters. It features a glossy black lacquered dial with white gold hands and indices. Chromolite lume shines mighty bright as well and does that for about 8 hours in blue. Floating above the dial is a sapphire crystal, and as this is a Rolex, no AR coating inside. Surrounding the dial is a unidirectional rotating bezel with a scratch-resistant insert in ceramic. Note that the numerals and markings are coated in platinum. Powering it all is a superlative chronometer caliber 3235, which features the Chronergy escapement, increased precision, increased power reserve and improved resistance to shocks and magnetic fields, accurate to ±2 seconds a day. It now also has a very practical 70-hour power reserve. Finally, the sub comes on the new and improved iconic Oyster bracelet, features a very practical folding Oyster lock safety clasp with Rolex's glide lock extension system, allowing you to extend the length of the bracelet very easily by 20mm. Now look, this latest iteration of the sub is not revolutionary. No new Rolex release ever really is. Instead, this is evolutionary. Rolex calls the Submariner, and I quote, the reference among diver's watches. That is not Rolex just bragging about how good the sub is, that is just Rolex being factual. Every other diver's watch out there is bound to be compared against the Rolex Submariner. In a way, it is the Michael Jordan of diver's watches. I realize not everyone is able to check these out in the metal before buying, so I hope this video can help paint a better picture of what this watch is really like before you take a leap of faith here and order one before having had a chance to see one in the metal. Ignoring the smallest of details, this latest Submariner basically comes in a new size with a new bracelet and a new movement. So firstly, the size increase. I am not a fan of this trend of watches having to grow larger. When I initially read about the size increase from 40 to 41mm when the sub was first announced, there were a few thoughts that ran through my mind and none of them were positive. Now I have to say that my initial reaction was dead wrong. Rolex has increased the diameter ever so gently. By now we know that the 1mm change is only there in name and on paper, so in reality the diameter has changed by just about 0.5mm. More important than the diameter changes is that Rolex chiseled away at the lugs and the crown guards, which just make for a visually more balanced watch to my eye. Goodbye maxi case. This goes to show that a watch is indeed not to be judged based on diameter alone. The overall proportions matter so much more. Now the choice to tweak the lug width then to 21mm and balance out the bracelet and clasp as well, by the way, feels and looks better proportioned to my eye. This is entirely subjective, of course. One note here is that for this white gold model the center links are clearly polished. Note that on the steel models the center links are left brushed instead, so they have a more utilitarian look to them. Now another big change is essentially invisible, and that is of course the new caliber. Not new to Rolex but new to the sub. An already bulletproof watch just got a little bit more bulletproof, I guess. You now have Rolex's Chronergy escapement, increasing efficiency and reliability of the watch. You also see a dramatic increase in the power reserve from 48 hours to a phenomenal 70 hours. I mean, what more do we really want here? on the wrist it wears much the same as the previous Submariner. That is to say, it has a certain wrist presence, but it certainly is no sea dweller. Thanks to the small tweaks to the bracelet and the case, I can't help but feel it wears nicer than its predecessor. And that was already a great watch to begin with. I've said it before, but the increase in diameter is basically invisible to me, and with these new and to my eye better proportions, the wrist experience is improved over the outgoing model. Now this is entirely subjective, of course. It's still a compact design that sits just 12 mm high, and a 47.6 mm lug to lug means this watch will fit pretty much all wrists, big and small. If you happen to have worn the older Submariners, then I would say that this model feels more like a good old sub than its predecessor. Less boxy and, yes, I'll say it, a bit sleeker. Not sure if that makes any sense, but that's what it feels like on the wrist. Getting one of these on your wrist is, for the time being, still a bit of a challenge, as these aren't exactly easily available at your AD for the time being. All things said and done, this sub is built like a tank and is yet another step forward in the evolution of this iconic wristwatch. This is a fantastic diver's watch, as it has always been, and that is built to last according to the latest and modern standards. While I fully expected to have a reason to complain about the increase in size, I will readily admit that I find myself baffled by how much of a positive difference these new tweaks have made. Now don't get me wrong, the previous version was already a stellar watch. If you happen to own that one already, the reasons to upgrade are clearly rather limited, but that is always the case when Rolex introduces a new model. Incremental change is always the name of the game with Rolex. Overall, this Submariner is a very worthy successor.